Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, that is going to change things in the trajectory of this convention. When Mrs. Hamer got ready to take her seat down there at the convention, she first sat down and she said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rouville, Mississippi." This lady gave her full physical address on national television. What's going on? It's your girl Kyra here, interpreter of African American history and culture, motivational and spiritual speaker. And we are back with day 6 of the Black History Report. And today we're going to be talking about something that is very dear to my heart, a part of the movement that touches me deeply. Today we're talking about Freedom Summer in Mississippi. Now, you all heard me mention about Selma, Alabama yesterday, and you all heard me talk about how it led to the signing of the Voting Rights Bill, of course, on August 6, 1965. But a lot of people have to remember that the movement and the stride towards voting rights began before Selma, Alabama even came into action. The journey in the fight for these voting rights for Black people, it began in the state of Mississippi. Mississippi, where Black people literally are being lynched, shot, killed, beaten, raped, simply for even just mere mentioning the fact that they want to exercise their right as an American citizen and register to vote. See, a lot of people don't realize that in Mississippi, it is at this time the most dangerous state in the country for Black people to live in. You ask some Black people today, they might say it's still the most dangerous state in the country where Black people live in. But in the state of Mississippi, a lot of people have to realize just how dangerous it was to try to attempt to register to vote. And a few people that came down to Mississippi realized this all too well. Young activists by the name of Bob Moses, another man by the name of Dave Dennis, and not to mention Aaron Henry, who was a local Mississippian. And what they decided to do was form what is known as Freedom Summer. After you would have where a lot of Black people that attempted to register to vote had been shot and killed, one of the most famous ones being Vernon Damer, who was murdered for trying to get more Black people to attempt to register to vote, Herbert Lee, and not to mention Lewis Allen. Different people killed for simply wanting to register to vote. Well, what happened was, with a lot of these people wanting to attempt to register to vote, they're not going to stop there. Even through all the racial violence and bigotry, they're going to fight back and do their best to obtain their constitutional right to do so. So what ends up happening? Bob Moses proposes Freedom Summer. And with Freedom Summer, what's going to happen is they're going to call for 1,000 Black and white volunteers to descend on Mississippi to increase voter registration amongst African Americans. See, at this point, Black people who attempted to register to vote had to face paying a poll tax in the most poorest state in the country, where Black people are so poor, they literally couldn't even afford to put food on the table. Not to mention they had to pass a literacy test, where a lot of people are actually illiterate because a lot of these people who are able to register to vote now were actually descendants of those who were once enslaved. And the last, but certainly not least, the grandfather clause that actually said that if your ancestors couldn't vote before the Civil War, you can vote afterwards. All of these laws are still put in place to disenfranchise African Americans. But when Bob Moses and others had decided to propose Freedom Summer, calling for all these volunteers to descend on Mississippi, they wanted to help combat different ridiculous things that were put in place to try to keep Black people from going to the polls, like being asked how many bubbles are in a bar of soap, how many jelly beans are in one jar. And so what ended up happening, ladies and gentlemen, 1,000 of these different volunteers are going to descend on Mississippi. But on that first day of Freedom Summer, after 3 young men, James Chaney, who was a local Black Mississippian, he was from Meridian, and then 2 other young Jewish men, Michael Schwerner and another by the name of Andrew Goodman, had came down trying to increase voter registration. See, Mickey Schwerner had already been working in Mississippi for a few months, and he and James Chaney decided to head up north to try to train some of these young freedom fighters for coming down to Mississippi. They wanted them to know exactly what they're about to get themselves into. A lot of these trainings, when I tell you, they turned increasingly heated. because they didn't understand that this is not just for play, or just this is the reality of life for Black Mississippians day in and day out. But while they were up there doing the trainings, they got word that Mount Zion Baptist Church had actually underwent a mysterious fire being lit. Not to mention that a lot of these Black people in this church, as they're heading outside, are going to be beaten at the hands of the Ku Klux Klan. Y'all, the Klan is running rampant through Mississippi. The Klan is going to be responsible for hundreds of lynchings of Black people in Mississippi. Men, women, children, boys, and girls of all ages. Understand how increasingly violent it was to be active in this movement. But when James Chaney and Andrew and Mickey Shorter got word of this, they decided to head back down to Mississippi to investigate. And that's when, of course, Andrew Goodman decided to go with them as well. But while they are back in Mississippi, they're going to be arrested. So supposedly they were speeding when they're pulled over by Sheriff Cecil Price. Understand that a few things are going to happen at this point. Once they are arrested, they're going to be later released on that night. And when you are released at night from jail or prison in Mississippi during this time in the movement, honey, it only meant one thing. More than likely, you weren't going to make it back home. Well, I just have to say this, ladies and gentlemen. Understand a few things that are happening at this point. When they are released, they are going to be followed again. See, Sheriff Cecil Price had been working with the members of the Ku Klux Klan to get everything put into action. Because what's going to happen at this point, these young men are all going to be shot. James Chaney had nearly every bone broken in his body. That's the young Black man. And he's going to be shot multiple times. Their bodies are buried on an earthen dam to be discovered 44 days later. Now, the Klan thought this was going to keep people from coming down, to keep them from being active in the movement. But honey, they gonna come down in droves. And what they begin doing is establishing freedom schools, citizenship trainings, voter registration drives, and they are going to get Black people galvanizing a movement to try to get them attempted to register to vote. One of the most important things that they did was they established their own political party, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. And what the MFDP is going to do, they're going to go to the Democratic National Convention in 1964. They're in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and they're going to challenge the all-white delegation. See, Mississippi is not an all-white state, but you have an all-white delegation. Well, when they do go to challenge this all-white delegation, let's just say that a few things happen that they probably did not anticipate at that. Let's just say, at that Democratic National Convention, things are going to change for the duration of that convention. Well, what ends up happening is a few people are going to attend this convention. People like Fannie Lou Hamer, not to mention the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and also other people like Aaron Henry are all going to be present at this convention. A lot of people are going to be speaking. And of course, Dr. King gets his speech, but it is the speech and the presence of my favorite female activist, Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, that is going to change things in the trajectory of this convention. When Mrs. Hamer got ready to take her seat down there at the convention, she first sat down and she said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the Credentials Committee, my name is Mrs. Fannie Lou Hamer, and I live at 626 East Lafayette Street, Rouville, Mississippi." This lady gave her full physical address on national television in the very state that Black men, women, and children are being strung up on trees for the very thought of wanting to attempt to register to vote. And at this point, Mrs. Hamer was no longer running scared, honey. She said, in fact, Klansmen, Kluxers, Night Riders, whatever you want to call yourself, if you want to come and find me so badly, honey, I'm going to tell you where to come and look. Ooh, that's gangster right there, y'all. Well, as she sat down and gave the message about what was happening to Black people there in Mississippi, let's just say LBJ was so scared of this that he decided to cut off her speech. And what ends up happening at this point, ladies and gentlemen, it backfired on them. And they began playing Mrs. Hamer's speech for moments at a time, over and over in the media. But shortly thereafter, this had taken place. So you have to understand that a lot of these people that are going to attempt to be a part of trying to, I guess you want to say, stall what was happening at the convention and the Mississippi delegation. LBJ realized he did have to make a deal with the MFDP, and he decided to offer them 2 delegate seats at large. And let's just say they're 2 non-voting seats. So what the heck are they going to do with that? But that's when you do see a switch in the parties. And what ends up happening at this point, ladies and gentlemen, this is when you are going to see those who once voted democratically in the South are going to switch to the Republican Party, especially after LBJ himself decided to sign into law the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Black people in Mississippi put their lives on the very line to attempt to register to vote. And we exist and we have the right to vote because of women like Fannie Lou Hamer, because of women like Victoria Gray, because of women like Mary, because of men like Bob Moses, Aaron Henry, Dave Dennis, and scores of others, Mickey Schwerner, Andrew Goodman, James Chaney. These people fought for the right to vote. And it's because of them, ladies and gentlemen, that I, as a Black Mississippi native, can walk up the steps of the county courthouse today and cast my vote and place my signature on any ballot that I may choose. Mississippi Freedom Summer of 1964 literally lays out the gateway of what was going to happen in 1965 Selma. And of course, the Voting Rights Act being signed later on that year on August 6th. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you all have enjoyed this video and learning of what happened there in Mississippi during Freedom Summer. And ladies and gentlemen, please be sure to like, share, and subscribe to this video. If you like the content, please feel free to share it. And I hope to see you all again back here for day 7 as we talk about what happens there in Birmingham, Alabama. You guys, please always remember what your girl always say. Remember to always to stay up and to also stay blessed. Y'all be easy and have a wonderful day.